Mr. Stinger Frames, Hawke's Bay's own Mike Zachan. And how you going tonight, mate?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Dave. Cheers for having us on the show.
Now, you're not the first Kiwi I've had on here, but you're someone I've heard a lot about for a long time. And the most common phrase I hear about you is you're just a geometry wizard. How did all that come about?
Well, I guess a long time ago, to be fair, I've been racing probably, on and off 20 years. Started in 1999. I bought a frame, had a blown motor in it. So we put our own motor in there and went racing, had a great time. Built a few frames after that. And it sort of went from there, to be fair. I probably in about 2005, I rode an Aussie-style bike, a Mitch it was. And thing just about ripped my arms out. Couldn't believe it. And I thought, I've got to have me some of that, you know. So Mr. Geometry sort of thing, I guess, has just come about from building the bikes, racing the bikes, living them, breathing them, sleeping them, you know, every minute of the day. When you're passionate about a sport, you know, you put 110% in, and most of the time I've got 110% back.
That's awesome. And if I'm being fair, the people that have told me this is like Hamish Golding, Mark Plaisted's a friend of mine, and he just said to me flat out, without the Stinger frame, the Aussie title just wouldn't have happened.
Oh, potentially, but you know, those two guys can ride a bike, and you know, you would never know. Put him on his FZR, he could have been there as well. So it was great to be a part of, and I'm really stoked to have been a part of that. Back in about, I'm just guessing here, going off the top of my head, probably about 2015, Darren Talor and I had been sort of talking for a couple of years about building a bike, and then everything sort of happened, and I flew over on a Thursday. We proceeded to do 3 18-hour days in his workshop building a bike for him. And that was really cool. You know, it was an honour to build a bike for such a well-known top rider. You know, he's the greatest of all time. No one will ever come close to being as good as Darren. There'll be just no chance. You know, the guy's dedicated his life to Speedway, and now he's getting to pass it on to his boy, which is really, really good. It's good in a way that he can pass it on to his boy, but I would have really liked to have seen him mentor a few of the young and up and coming guys as well, and pass his knowledge on to keep, you know, his legacy going, not just with his boy but other guys as well.
Darren's someone I've gotten to know a little bit through doing these things, and you know, I didn't realise how many people lean on him for advice, and I because I didn't know him very well, I just thought he was the dude that super serious, kept everything to himself and all that. But I didn't realise if you actually are at the track with him and you're willing to listen, he will share some setup tips, which is what I never would have thought.
Yeah, potentially not always at the track. You know, he is very serious, and that's why he's had the results that he has as well. Can't take it away from the guy. You know, he's an absolute genius. He's the same as me in a way. Obviously a lot better rider, but in the way of thinking about things. He said it in an interview I was watching. I can't remember the guy that was taking the interview, but you know, he said, to understand your motorbike, you got to build your motorbike, and you know, that's what he's done. Many times. He used to build his own frames back in the day. He builds his own motors. You got to get down into the scientific side of it and really understand how the sidecar works, and that can be sitting there looking at it in the shed, thinking, why isn't this working, or how can I go faster? And I'm sure that's what he's doing right now. He'll be looking to go faster to start competing with these later model engines that are coming out. It's what you got to do if you want to stay ahead. You know, so sorry, I was just touch base on what you said about, you know, him being super serious, and basically the way I look at it is at the track, he would share certain knowledge to, to keep himself ahead as well. But after the meeting, you asked him something, give him a beer, and you wouldn't be able to shut him up. He's a top bloke.
You're right. And rather than turn this into the Darren Trelaw show, we'll talk about, Mike Zachan. But from my experience with New Zealand Speedway sidecars particularly, I think as a kid, I watched some in Huntley in the late 90s, and I think I went to Rotorua as well. I'm not exactly sure, but there really wasn't a presentation as such, and I don't think Australia was much better. And then all of a sudden, things got real serious about sidecars, and you start seeing some really well-presented Kiwis, and very professional and very fast. What period of time did you sort of see that the Kiwis really lifted in every level?
So I started in 99, and I would like to think that probably in around 2005-06 is when the level of the sport really started to lift. And I'll be a bit of a blow-ass and say that I was probably a little bit of a part of that, introducing some Australian frames. Admittedly, I'm not going to lie, they're a Mitch copy, there or thereabouts. I started out with a basic Mitch, like they look like a Mitch. If you can't beat them, you got to join them. You know what I mean? So, I would like to say I was a part of bringing the scene into some sort of professional side, whether it be just faster sidecars or the wings. I wasn't the introducee of the wings. Another guy did that, but we all sort of went that way after a few bits of moaning and that. And I was one of them at the start. I didn't like the fairings or the wings. We were all classic sort of style bikes, and it took a while to sway everybody around to that way. But I guess television, the internet really started to expose the Australian sidecar scene, how cool it was, how quick they are, how professional they are. So same thing, if you want to, be able to beat them, you've got to be able to be, in the same game. So, yeah, about that time is when the sport really started to grow some exposure. And start to look the goods, and it's continued on. It's just keep going and going and going. Like Ben and myself, we got best presented car and crew at Palmerston North Speedway awards the year just been. So just shows you, out of all the cars, everything, the sidecars can still punch well above their weight.
I've talked about this with Jamie Milne, and that the scene over there seems like you guys have a lot of racing to do. And is it that way? Like, do you have to travel for the races, or can you race a lot?
We can. Admittedly, we don't always race on bike-specific tracks. So a lot of our tracks are clay-based, and they can get quite rough, which isn't always ideal, and it doesn't produce good racing, and it's not good spectacle for the crowd either. So we can go to Auckland or Christchurch or Invercargill. They run the bike tracks. It's not, when you look at Australia and how far you guys have to travel, it's actually not that far for us. Auckland 6 hours. We think it's a long way, but it isn't. I've driven with Dylan Moen, Jamie's brother. We drove from Adelaide to Sydney, to Brisbane, and that was a long way. That was brutal, but it was all part of the fun. But we can race pretty much, if you want to race somewhere in the season. You can race just about every weekend if you wanted to.
It's crazy to hear that, because there's huge gaps, not just over the map of Australia, but there's huge gaps in racing over here, which can be frustrating. But I know everyone harps on about Spud, but Andrew Buchanan did it quite well. He had Denny Cox on the back, and they did a lot of Australian stuff, but then they hopped over to NZ and did a lot there. So how come, I think the answer is COVID, but how come you don't see a lot of Kiwis gearing up to come over here yet?
It basically just comes down to the financial side, to be fair, Dave. It doesn't. It's not cheap. Spud's a very, clever businessman, and he's got good backing sponsors as well. So he's been on the good gear and had the good team around him. His wife Philippa, Bernie, absolute brilliant guy. So to have those guys around you, it actually enables you to be able to do that, and not everybody does. So to go and race an Aussie, you got to throw a figure of 10 grand if you want to do, say, 2 or 3 meetings. It's 10 grand, whatever way you look at it. So that's to fly your passenger there and back, your bike, if you want to do it properly and not ride someone else's. And yeah, that's what it comes down to. Is not all of us have sort of got that sort of money lying around to do it. I'd love to have done it. Probably getting a little bit older to have done it now, and I've had a few crashes. That's probably put me in a position where I would shy away from it. But it's definitely something I'd look at doing. Not a serious meeting, but just something to have come over and have a bit of fun.
Well, there's enough mates and there's enough Speedway family, mate. Don't put it out there, because we'll get it happen.
Definitely something I'd like to tick off my bucket list before I fully hang the helmet up. Yeah.
I didn't realise that financial figure was so high for you guys, because I don't know why. I just never put 2 and 2 together, but it makes sense, because even for me as a fan to travel, say, from my house to Bowen, we did the Gary Moon meeting. It was probably, $1,500 with 3 kids,
Yep, too right. It all adds up. And if you want to take your pit crew and things like that as well, you can't always expect them to put their hands in their pockets. Pretty much here it comes down to the dollar, really. If you were to borrow a bike over there, that would definitely probably cut, I would have to say $5,000 off it, because it's probably $2,500 each way for your bike to get there and back. What's
wrong with us? Why do we spend so much money on a sport that really isn't on the radar of anyone else?
I know, I've questioned my sanity many times, but we still do it in 4 laps, a minute and a half, a minute 10 seconds on the quick tracks. It's not very big bang for your buck, really, but we do it. We love it. So it's once it's in the blood too. It's bloody hard to get out of there.
That is something that you touched on and everyone touches on. Once it's in your body, you end up with it tattooed on you, and your bloody it doesn't go away. Like I reckon it's worse than a drug.
Yep, I think you're right. And a lot of people say to me, if I've got a wheel in my shed, even if I've retired and I've got a wheel or a motor or a set of carburetors, something will end up being created in here, and it'll end up rolling out the gate, and we go racing again. So I don't know what it's going to take to give it up, but yeah, I'd like to be able to give it up on my own terms, not in a hospital bed. To be fair, that's probably the main thing for me.
I try not to talk about this sort of stuff, but every rider that's any good or have done it for any period of time, everyone's had that big crash. What was your massive crash, and what was the scenario?
So the biggest one I've had would have been in Palm in 2017, and we just got out of the start, and I got a little bit crooked, pulled a little wheelie, and we started to come across on another rider, and we actually we came together and sort of straightened up. And what happened is the other rider pulled a wheelie as well, which put him into the turn a little bit further than he would generally like before he could take the turn. And I happened to be on the outside of him and just touched it, just clipped the front wheel. And that was just enough to tip the bike over onto the kneeler, and it came to a halt. And my knees come off the tray and basically hit the track, and my body's gone forward and my knees gone back, and then just snapped my femur right at the top of my leg, So, and that buggered my back too, being crunched over in that position. So that was my biggest one. And the femur's fine now. The leg is absolutely brilliant. No, I get no pain from that whatsoever. But the back will be, the one that'll give me the grief for the rest of my life, unfortunately.
How do you approach looking at a frame or building something where you go, you know what, I reckon I could do this better, but how do you actually try it? Because it's all good and well on paper, but how do you actually go about it?
Yeah, so it's a good question, to be fair. There is a fair bit of thought. Not many people have asked me that question, but I guess we start with basically a motor. So someone would come to me and say, this is what I want to do. This is the motor. And if it was a Suzuki, GSX R1000 or something like that, well, pretty much run of the mill. I've built a fair few of them, probably 10 of that type of frame. So within reason, I asked the rider, how aggressive do you want it? It can either be tame or aggressive. It depends what track the rider is riding as well. If it's clay, if he wants to ride clay all day, we don't make it as aggressive as a dirt bike because the clay is very sticky and tacky until it slicks up. But so that's pretty much how I used to start things. As we've progressed over the years, I've started to make the bikes a little bit more adjustable so that the bikes, instead of being more specific to one track, they can be used on multiple tracks, or if the track's deep, you can adjust your bike to suit a deep track or a slick track. Involves moving a steering head left to right. Like it's no secrets. Hey, if anyone wants to have a shot at doing them, I even sent 2 of my steering heads to Bernie so he could chuck them on a couple of bikes. I don't mind helping anybody that wants to get into it and is passionate about it. Bernie's dedicated, probably friggin', 20 or 30 years to the sidecars, or more probably. And he will help anybody, give you the shirt off his back. So I'm the same. It doesn't matter what bike you got, if you need help, we will help. So your bike behind me, we move the motor forward and back. Darren's bike's the same. Mark's bike's the same. It gives you the option, like, instead of being stuck with something that just goes good in one specific position, you can move things around to suit you. Like Mark's a bit bigger than me. Probably the biggest thing with my new bike is I machined the bottom off the motor. So that's to get the centre of gravity lower. These Yamahas, the later model ones, are really, really heavy. Like Mark's bike's very wheel stand. You'll notice it's wheeling quite a lot, and that's probably a lot to do with having his motor quite high in the frame. So there's definitely room to improve with even Mark's bike, and he loves it, and that's cool. This bike here will probably end up being in his stables as well at some stage when I've given it up. You can move things around a certain amount. To be fair, they all look the same, but no 2 bikes of mine will fit in the jig the same, because I'd always change something to try and get it better. Or if sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it's like, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that. We won't do that again, and on the next one, And then all the motors are different in different shapes. I built one around an RSV4 Aprilia, done 2 frames for a guy called Wayne just down south. So whatever you can build pretty much a frame around anything if you know sort of where to put the motor for weight. It's all about the balancing of the weight centers of the motor and the center of gravity.
There's a lot of things to unpack with that answer, and one of the challenges too when you start machining the bottom off motors and that is you're going to have to find a way of oiling the motor, as opposed to running the old school sort of sump that everyone tries to baffle on that. So do you run like a remote oil filter and sort of dry sump sort of setup, or what happens there?
I don't know if you can see.
Yeah.
We've got, so I've had to like where the oil filter mounted on the bike, on the motor standard, obviously that's been totally machined off. So I've made all of this up. It was actually a bit of an engineering masterpiece in itself. That's basically all these 3 lines here are oil out, and then you have one big -12 line that comes. -12 line comes out of the motor, straight from the standard oil pump. It's not dry sump. You just don't have enough room on the bike to really set up a dry sump tank. So admittedly, because you look at it and you think that, and when I look at it as well, I think shit, that adds a lot of weight to the bike. But these days, we normally have you would notice we normally have the battery sitting here.
Yeah.
So basically, that's just basically taking place of the battery, and the battery now only weighs like 300 grams. We've got the ability to be able to run lithium. So, that's sort of how I counteract that weight, so I can have the weight that my battery would normally be here, and I put my battery at the back of the bike to offset a little bit of weight as well. So yeah, it is an absolute major. And to be fair, halfway through machining it off, I was like, what have I done? Have I actually junked 10 grand's worth of motor, you know?
Or I wouldn't say mistakes, but without innovation or without trying things, you're just not going to go forward. It's not going to happen. And there's a lot of people, due to money or whatever it is, that are still stuck on, you know, older style equipment and staying on FZRs and all that sort of stuff. And that's fine. They still are competitive, but parts are running out. Newer motors are way more refined with less work needing to be done. I noticed you said something about an Aprilia motor as well. So do you guys get a lot of variety over there?
We do, actually. You know, probably the only I haven't built one around a CBR 1000. Built one around a VTR in the early days. It was one of my early bikes, a V-twin, and then Kawasaki. So I've pretty much done everything else. Oh, sorry, I tell a lie. I have built one around the CBR, but it was an early model, early 04 model. But yeah, Kawasaki I sort of stayed clear of. I'm not a big fan of green to start with, as most motorsport people aren't. But not to say it's unlucky, but it's just superstition reasons, really. The Aprilia motor was a challenge. Obviously, it's a V4, so you've got that back set of cylinders coming out towards you. Creates its own geometry challenges, but we got there in the end, and the frame came out really, really good.
Because I know with, you know, I don't want to go down the route of this is worse or better or you can't do this or that, but me personally, I've just learned how to MIG weld at work, and it's an art in itself. And then I watch another guy who's an amazing alloy TIG welder. So what sort of welding do you do, and what works for you?
Yeah, everything's TIG welded. I don't even have a MIG in my workshop at the moment. It's all TIG welding. So there's a couple of reasons. Chromoly, you can MIG weld it. And to be fair, only some parts of the frame we actually put the chromoly to its absolute max stress levels. So you could get away with, I even think Russell used to MIG weld chassis up in the early, well, it might have been 90s maybe. He decided that he would, I'm just going off memory and what I've heard, but he would start pumping out his frames MIG welded because it's cheaper, because it takes less time. And that's an option to look at too. But I just prefer TIG welding. It's really tidy. There's no sparks. I generally don't even like to grind on my frames. I linish all the tubes up before they go in. When they're in, they're tacked. When they're fitting, perfect. Because if you start getting your grinder out and start chopping things, it never looks right, you know. And if you really want your frames to be able to stay bare steel and to look really tidy and just see your welds, you know, like there's some amazing fabricators out there in Australia building sidecar frames alone, you know. You know them all. So and you know, anybody that does it, I take my head off to them. You know, there's a mega amount of work goes into them for not a lot of financial recognition, really. I know what we charge for them is a certain figure, but the hours that go into just standing there looking at it, thinking, you know, have I done that right, or could I do this better, or let's think how to do this. You know, you need to think 10 steps ahead of yourself, or you will have the grinder out. You know?
Really interesting, and I'm also a spray painter by trade, so I really hate painting over really nice welds because you kind of lose them. They don't, I don't know, you kind of ruin all those hours of work. But I want to talk about when you said about your steering head geometry, and that by far goes way beyond what I can comprehend. So, you know, moving things a degree or two here or there, that really makes a big difference.
So it's not even really about moving a degree or two. It's about transferring, because you've got your back wheel driving, say, and it drives into your front wheel, and if you're directly in line with each other, that's basically going to be neutral. You know, it's the back wheel drives into that. If you change your back wheel and move it over, and it's driving, it's going to try and drive around this side if you move it one way, So basically that's what we do. We have a steering head that we can move sideways. And it's like a midget or a speed car, I think you guys call them, when they move their wheels right out because they want the car to turn. This is sort of the same thing, You can do it with your back wheel as well. The guys actually have spaces and they move their back wheel around, but that, to me, it changes the geometry between your back wheel and your chair wheel as well. And you like to keep that sort of consistent. If you start changing that, everything changes. It's just not straight line. It's in the corners. It's all over the place. It sort of starts to change. So that's why I decided leave your back wheel in the same position and just start moving your front ends around.
That moving the rear wheel left to right, that's an old solo trick. And a lot of people do still do it. It's, whatever it works for them. But I noticed there is a lot of people out there too that like to set their bike up to drive like crazy. And you'll see them come into a corner and they physically can't pull the throttle on because they're just front wheeling to the fence. If someone was to buy, get you to build a bike and all this sort of thing, you get to the track and you say, look, set it up like this is how it's going to work. And then all of a sudden they go, no, I want it to be like that.
Yep.
You surely can't be using the bike for its full potential.
If you don't have adjustability, you spend probably a lot of time on the phone with people going, it won't do this, or it doesn't want to do that, or this is what it's doing, Where if you've got adjustability, it's as simple as saying, I'll move that 5 mil or push this out 5 mil or something like that, or 10 mil. But 5 mil can make a big difference. And I actually thought, when I used to hear people saying, 5 millimeters, makes a big difference, I'm like, bullshit. We're on dirt moves. It's not like we're on tarmac, but hey, I've tried it and I was blown away.
That's the other draw card, I think, but also the devil part of Speedway is no one lap's the same.
No, exactly. Yeah, start the race off, and it can be drivey, and then by the end of it, you're running in your same wheel tracks, and you've already scrubbed all the dirt off, so it can be slick. So you did right, and then it comes down to the combination. It takes the bike away, and it comes down to your passenger and the rider. The rider not giving it everything, and the passenger knowing and feeling the bike, knowing when to move around or when to transfer his weight here and there.
Yeah, it's been pretty common over my time growing up and all that. You have people who just chew through passengers, and nearly everyone you know of knows someone that's tried sidecars in some way, shape or form. But how have you found people keep coming into the sport? Like it must be a pretty big deal over there for there to be that much coverage in that.
There's one guy at Palmerston North, he's our local rep, and his name's Tony, or his nickname's Horse. He puts on a Have a Go Day every year, and it's a big undertaking for him, and I know it takes a lot of effort by a whole lot of people actually to get it all together. So he hires a track, and basically anybody that likes to, you can turn up, chuck the gear on and go and have a ride. It might cost you $10 or something like that, but that's brought many people into the sport. And some people don't want to go into a racing situation. They just want to get on, have a try and say, hey, I like it, or no, I don't, so exactly. So I'm sure with the amount of people and even the tracks over there that are bike dedicated, it must be able to be done there too, like have a go day once a year. I'm not sure on the regulations over there or what you'd have to do to sign your life away. I'm sure we would have to sign a piece of paper here to say, if it all turned to custard, don't sue us, sort of thing. But there's always that side of it. Anything is possible. But that's pretty much how we bring the new people into the sport here. But that's only in one part of New Zealand. It's not anywhere else. So you do end up with the same names coming back, like the Mike Zachans or the Russell Stewarts, Paul Humphrey, Nick Edmonds has just got back out of the sport, but he was come back in, Craig Bowler. There's so many names that have been around for 20 plus years that are still doing it, So that's what's keeping it alive at the moment. And these newbies, they're coming through, and then they get the bug, and they want to spend a bit more, and they want to go a bit faster, so they get a faster bike, and then they drop that one back down to some other people. It does happen, and it's really strong over here. Like, we're up at about 17 to 18 sidecars in Palmerston North this season, so that's really, really good.